Hey everyone, let's jump right into this explainer. We are decoding a massive shift happening right now in global trade, India's new free market reality. And look, this isn't just dry policy. We're talking about a fundamental, ground-up transformation of how India interacts with the global economy. I'm honestly thrilled to guide you through this, because we're looking at a completely redrawn map of international commerce.
Consider this quote from the source material. "You are part of a lucky generation that will experience India's free market for the first time." That really hits the nail on the head, doesn't it? It brilliantly captures the sheer scale of what's happening. We're entering an era where Indian and foreign brands are going to openly compete on a totally level playing field. Foreign brands are going to flood in, and Indian brands are going to step out onto the world stage. It's without a doubt a once-in-a-generation economic shift. All right, let's look at part one, India's expanding trade map. So there's a super fascinating contrast playing out at the moment. On one side, you've got the much-anticipated trade deal with the USA. And, well, it's kind of stalled. The deadlines are totally up in the air right now, mostly due to some recent U.S. court rulings on tariffs, plus some ongoing geopolitical conflicts, like the situation with Iran. But contrast that roadblock with the sheer momentum India is building everywhere else. I mean, they're successfully pushing forward with the European Union, a massive agreement expected to take effect by 2027 that's going to bring European brands straight to your fingertips. Throw in the successful agreements with Australia and the ASEAN nations, and the forward momentum is just undeniable. And it absolutely doesn't stop there. The scale of India's active free trade discussions is just massive. We're talking ongoing negotiations with Canada, Chile, South Africa, Saudi Arabia. They're even revising their existing deal with Japan and working on frameworks with the SAARC nations like Nepal, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka. So rather than a scattergun approach, India is being highly strategic. They're meticulously stitching together a global trade network, country by country. Which brings us to Section 2, the New Zealand breakthrough. $20 billion. That's the massive investment commitment pouring into India from New Zealand. And why is this particular deal such a game changer? Well, New Zealand isn't just any advanced economy. They're part of the exclusive Five Eyes intelligence alliance. So securing this deal gives India crucial high-level access to Wellington, and, by extension, a much stronger foothold in the Western world. The specific perks of this deal are honestly incredible for Indian industries. Textiles, which used to get hit with up to a 10% tariff, slashed to absolute zero. Leather footwear, engineering goods, plastics, electronics, all dropping to 0% tariffs. Plus, the deal carves out a dedicated quota for 5,000 visas. That is a huge, tangible win for Indian exporting industries right out of the gate. The official goal here is to reach $5 billion in bilateral trade within the next 5 years. It's a fantastic target, for sure, but it also sets up a really critical question that we're going to circle back to later in this explainer. When we actually hit that $5 billion mark, who is going to be selling more goods to whom? Keep that tucked in the back of your mind.
Let's pivot to Section 3, the Russia trade reality. When we look east, there's a staggering, and I mean staggering, disparity. Right now, India imports around $60 billion worth of goods from Russia, which, as you've probably guessed, is heavily driven by crude oil. But India only exports about $4 billion in return. That is a massive gap. Because of this extreme imbalance, not to mention the heavy geopolitical hurdles involved in just securing basic trade like oil, trying to hammer out a true free trade agreement with Russia is just incredibly complicated right now. Based on the analysis, any serious future FTA with Russia probably wouldn't just be a simple one-on-one deal. It would likely have to be a huge regional pact, pulling in neighboring nations like Kazakhstan and potentially even Belarus. With Vladimir Putin expected to visit India later this year, it's totally possible we'll see the groundwork for this broader regional approach start to take shape. Moving right along to Section 4, USA and China comparisons. Now, you might assume the USA has free trade agreements with pretty much everybody, but surprisingly, the US network is actually quite limited. They deal mostly with their neighbors, Canada and Mexico, plus Australia, a handful of Middle Eastern nations, South Korea, Singapore, and a few select South American countries. Why so few? Well, because the US Supreme Court previously revoked certain tariff structures, the US is left with a highly specific rather than a globally sweeping trade network. And when we stack India's approach up against China's, we're looking at two completely different playbooks. As we've seen, India's going for a very strategic, individual, country-by-country strategy across the globe. China, on the flip side, actually has relatively few individual FTAs, mostly with places like Iceland, New Zealand, and Australia.
Instead, China's strategy leans heavily on massive regional access pacts, most notably the RCEP, which gives them sweeping access to huge blocks of the market all at a single stroke. But here is the core truth we really have to acknowledge. China's growth story is impressive because they actually export more than they import. It's that simple. Trade agreements are great, but they only actually create national wealth if a country is actively manufacturing and exporting goods into those newly opened markets.
This leads us directly into Section 5, the Make in India Challenge.
You see, India's single biggest economic hurdle right now is the current account deficit. In plain terms, that just means buying significantly more from the rest of the world than you're selling back to it, which ultimately drags down the value of your domestic currency. So if India signs all these incredible FTAs, but domestic manufacturing doesn't step up to actually export things, well, these agreements could literally worsen the deficit by just flooding the country with foreign imports. Fixing this is going to require some deep corporate patriotism. Businesses can't just exist to rake in quick profits so founders can buy fancy mansions and luxury cars. Companies need a serious long-term vision. They need the ambition to build true legacy brands. Think along the lines of Tata or Reliance. We need brands that are fiercely focused on high quality and can proudly represent India on the global stage. But it's not just about manufacturing, right? It's also a massive battle of perception. The source analysis notes that India is actively having to fight a global PR battle. They're having to combat negative and, frankly, racist narratives being pushed on platforms like Instagram and TikTok. The reporting points to certain politically motivated accounts, specifically pro-Turkey and pro-Pakistan networks, that actively aim to damage India's international image. To really win in global trade, international buyers have to implicitly trust Indian quality. So India needs a massive, concerted PR push to build up a new India brand image, striving to achieve that automatic, unquestioned respect that comes with labels like Made in Japan or Made in Germany. And you know what? That respect really has to start at home. Self-criticism is totally important for growth, but self-hatred is where a country loses. While it's absolutely necessary to demand better quality from domestic producers, citizens also need to take pride in and actively support their own domestic brands. Just think about how proudly German citizens back Volkswagen. That exact same kind of domestic backing is what's required right here for Indian brands to truly thrive internationally. Which leaves us with this final, somewhat provocative question to ponder. As these once-in-a-generation trade deals officially open up the globe, will India just remain a massive consumer market for the rest of the world to sell to? Or will Indian citizens and businesses step up, improve quality, and make sure the world actively buys made in India? The trade doors have officially been unlocked. Now it's entirely up to domestic industries to actually walk through them. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep a close eye on the world's map, you guys, because it is changing faster than ever.